started these sessions. Today is the third session. Raymond Francis, a surgeon, says, we have a system of medicine that is fundamentally stupid. We do nothing to prevent disease. We wait for people to get sick. Once they are sick, instead of curing their disease, we suppress the symptoms by prescribing toxic chemicals and doing surgery. Then the toxicity of the chemicals makes the patient even sicker, creating entirely new diseases. And then finally, to hide the fact that the patient is now sicker than when they started, we don't call these new problems diseases, but we call them side effects. It is not in the interests of the medical industry or the pharmaceutical industry to practice preventative medicine because no one makes money. Friends, today's topic is all about eat to beat disease, the longevity feast. It is termed as a feast because the people of the blue zones, the centenarians, live long, healthy lives, and they're always feasting. So the mystery is, what is it that they feast on which leads them to live long, healthy lives? Just a disclaimer, my presentation is not intended to provide medical advice. It is intended for information purposes only. Please kindly note that I'm not from the medical field, but my research is based on the work of scientists and medical professionals. If you decide to make changes, please do consult with your GP. My presentation is based on my own experience and in no way implies that this is a universal cure, as I recognize that each individual is unique. Also, I have no hidden agenda. I'm not making anything out of this, just sharing some wisdom. Knowledge is power. So what is this series all about? For those of you who have joined the series for the first time today, all of us want to be healthy because good health allows us to enjoy life, progress spiritually, and achieve our goals. We want to be healthy physically, mentally, and spiritually. This series is all about holistic health and longevity, and specifically increasing health span naturally. Treating the root cause of all diseases through lifestyle changes rather than treating diseases with medication one by one as they come. And longevity may be one of the side effects of these lifestyle changes. Let us recap now on what we talked about last week. We are looking at the first pillar of the 5 pillars of holistic health. The first pillar starts with M, mouth. Within the first pillar, we looked at fasting. A group of mice, all the mice were sort of brothers, were split into 2 groups. One group was fed all the food, whereas the other group was fed only 60% of that. The group which was fed 60% lived 40% longer and was healthier. So one can assume that just by reducing the caloric intake, but eating throughout the day, one would actually live longer and healthier. However, this did not turn out to be the case. The mice which were fed 60% less, but throughout the day, the mice were thinner, but they did not necessarily live longer. Then the mice were fed in a shorter feeding window. They were fed 60%, but in a shorter feeding window. And that actually upregulated the mechanism against aging. So Dr. Nir Barzilai, he's from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, said, you need fasting to upregulate the mechanism against aging. One of the other prominent scientists in the field of longevity is David Sinclair, a biologist from Harvard Medical School. What does he tell us? He says, when you skip a meal or two, you are turning on the body's defenses against aging. And Dr. Luisa Petre says, it is recycling. And what is fasting? Fasting is recycling and cleaning at the same time, just like hitting a reset button to your body. Today, we live in a world of abundance of food, which has resulted in us eating all the time. The pandemic hasn't helped us. We are at home and the snacking has really increased. Dr. Jamna Das is a Florida-based consultant cardiologist and a clinical assistant professor with more than 30 years of experience. He has a keen interest in preventative health. He has performed thousands of interventional procedures during his career. You probably wouldn't expect a cardiologist to tell you that not eating is a key to better health. He's a passionate believer in finding new solutions to all diseases and in finding those solutions within ourselves. He advises his patients to fast. He tells us about the restorative processes that take place in the body when we take longer breaks from food. And he details the discoveries he's made about fasting and its effect on insulin, metabolic health, obesity, and heart health. His patients experience benefits ranging from weight loss to reversing diabetes, lowering blood pressure and cholesterol, to increasing longevity. His patients not only talk about the astounding difference fasting is making to their lives, but also the ripple effect that changing their beliefs and habits around food has had on their mental well-being and the rest of their lives. His educational videos on fasting and heart health have been viewed by hundreds of thousands on YouTube channel. So is food our fuel or something else? A lot of people think that food is our fuel, but we forget that it is also the raw material with which every single cell of our body is made up of. It doesn't make sense to think that what we eat is not going to impact our health. It does so, and also very profoundly. So the food that we eat should contribute to health and healing rather than to disease. When you have a diet and lifestyle-induced disease, What you put in your mouth can serve either as gasoline or water on the fire. When you eat unhealthy foods, you are putting gasoline on the fire. And when you eat healthy plant-based foods, it can serve as water on the fire. These are decisions that each of us need to make for ourselves. There is nobody that can eat for you or exercise for you. You are the captain of your own ship, and you have a responsibility to take care of your body. Next, we look at the blue zones. Dan Buettner looked around the world for the healthiest and longest lived people. It's not just they live to be 100 years, but in their later years, they're actually productive, healthy, doing everything they did when they were 70. One of the interesting stories Dan Buettner tells us is that he went to Okinawa to interview a 100-year-old man. He arrived at his home knowing that he lived with a 70-year-old son. He saw this man walking towards his garden with shawls and tools thrown over his shoulder. This guy was walking very briskly. Dan thought, this must be the son. So he ran over and said, could you tell me where your father is, as I'm here to interview your father? It turned out that he was actually talking to the father. These centenarians are just very productive at these advanced years. So the first blue zone is Loma Linda, California, where most people live 10 years more than the similar population in the US. In Nicoya, Costa Rica, there are high number of centenarians and in good health. The third blue zone is Sardinia, Italy, where there are 10 times more centenarians than anywhere else on earth. Ikaria, Greece, 1 in 3 will make it to their 90s. And Okinawa, Japan, there are 5 times more centenarians than the rest of the world. So now we need to look at the blue zone diet. So what do they eat? The first most important principle is 95% of the food comes from a plant. Studies have shown, so the best longevity foods in the blue zone diet are leafy greens, such as spinach, kale, beet, turnip tops, chard, and collards. Studies have shown that middle-aged people who consume the equivalent of a cup of cooked greens daily were half as likely to die in the next 4 years as someone who ate no greens. Now, the funniest thing is that of the 95% of food that they eat from plants, 50 to 80% of the calories actually come from carbohydrates. Today in the Western world, carbs are actually demonized. If we look at the diet of the Western world, 90% of the carbohydrates in the Western world are coming from refined foods. What do we mean by refined carbohydrates? You take a grain of wheat and you remove everything that is of value from the wheat, the germ, the bran, and what you are left with is the endosperm. Endosperm is pure starch. There is very little nutritional value left. So what do? Do you eat a bowl of white flour? Nobody eats a bowl of white flour. You add junk to it. You add fat, sugar, salt, preservatives, additives, colors, flavors. Then you eat the bowl of white flour as cookies and crackers. we wonder why we are dying of these diet-induced diseases. You can't remove everything of value that's naturally present in a plant and add junk to it and think it is going to sustain human health. It just doesn't happen. Within the plant food, they have a daily dose of beans. What they suggest is eat at least half a cup of cooked beans daily. Beans are the cornerstone of every blue zone diet in the world. Black beans in Nicoya, lentils, garbanzo, and white beans in the Mediterranean, and soybeans in Okinawa. One 5-country study financed by the World Health Organization found that eating 20 grams of beans every day reduced a person's risk of dying in any given year by about 8%. On an average, people in blue zones eat at least 4 times as many beans as we do. The third part of what they eat in their plant-based diet is their snack on nuts. What they suggest is eat 2 handfuls of nuts per day. And what are the nuts that they snack on? In Ikaria, they snack on almonds. In Nicoya, they snack on pistachios. And the Adventists, they eat all nuts. So nut eaters, on an average, outlive non-nut eaters by 2 to 3 years. Now let us look at what the power of a plant-based diet is. So if we look at Frances Greger, she was the grandmother of Dr. Michael Greger. She had end-stage heart disease, and she had multiple bypass operations. She went to see her cardiologist, and the cardiologist said, we can do no more bypass operations because there are no veins left in the leg with which we can do a bypass operation. All the plumbing has been used up. So Frances Greger, at the age of 65, was sent home in a wheelchair with a death sentence. She was sent home to die. She admitted herself into one of the earliest sort of centers of plant-based diet, Pritikin Center. She went on a plant-based diet and exercise. The miracle then happened. Within 3 weeks, Frances no longer required a wheelchair. She could walk 10 miles per day. She lived a further 31 years on plant-based nutrition. This, my friends, is the power of a plant-based diet. So Neil Bernard, who is the president of the Physicians Committee in the US, says, if you change your diet to a plant-based diet and do it very vigorously, you have enormous power. You can reverse heart disease, you can prevent it. And what does Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn tell us? He is the author of Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. He says, once you start eating plant-based foods, you make yourself heart attack proof. We know that people who eat this way will not have a heart attack. I mean, just think about this. Heart disease is one of the biggest diseases, killer diseases in the world today. Just by switching over to a pure whole food plant-based diet, we will become heart attack proof. He then tells us it is a foodborne illness. Heart disease is a foodborne illness, and we are never going to end this epidemic with stents, with bypasses, with drugs. because none of that is treating the causation of the disease. So let us, in brief, look at what the health benefits of a plant-based diet are. The first one is it promotes good health and reduces medication requirements. Second one is it lowers BMI and body fat. Third one is it lowers overall mortality. Fourth one is it prevents and reverses coronary heart disease. Fifth one is it also prevents and reverses type 2 diabetes. It reduces incidence of hypertension and high cholesterol. It improves symptoms from chronic illnesses such as gout, rheumatoid arthritis, and MS. It boosts immunity. 60% of our immunity is in our gut. It prevents autoimmune diseases, and it also prevents many cancers. So what does Neil Bernard, president of the Physicians Committee, have to tell us about a plant-based diet? He says, a plant-based diet is a powerful tool for preventing, managing, and even reversing type 2 diabetes. Then he tells us, not only is this the most delicious prescription you can imagine, but it's also easy to follow. Unlike other diets, there is no calorie counting, no skimpy portions, and no carb counting. Plus, all the side effects are good ones. So in a nutshell, what do we need to minimize or avoid? First of all, we need to minimize or avoid completely is animal products. Why? Animal protein promotes cancer growth. It is also associated with, with heart disease and stroke. In animal protein, we have high levels of IGF-1, which also promote cancer growth. We've got a lot of cholesterol in it and saturated fat. Then we need to avoid dairy. We know that human beings are the only mammals who drink the milk of another mammal. Milk is secretion designed to feed babies. Milk does not contain any nutrient that we cannot get elsewhere. Milk calcium is not necessarily protective against osteoporosis. The highest incidence of osteoporosis and weak bones is in countries with the highest consumption of milk, namely Norway, Finland, Sweden, Australia, UK, and USA. Cows do not produce calcium. They get it from eating greens. Milk is very high in saturated fat. Milk protein, casein, is linked to a number of cancers, namely prostate and ovarian, and liver cancer in children. Processed foods, they have been stripped of fiber. They are loaded in salt, sugar, and fat. They are low in nutrients. They contain a lot of artificial ingredients. And when we look at the label, it's as if we are reading a chemistry book. And they have been altered and engineered for overconsumption. Sugar is obviously addictive, results in weight gain, indirect cause of diabetes, results in a weakened immune system, and can result in liver failure and heart disease. And the final one is oil. Oil is just empty calories. There are no nutrients in oil if we compare them to carbs and proteins. Each gram has 9 calories, whereas carbs and proteins have 4 calories. It is a processed food. We should be able to get all the fat that we require from eating nuts, whole plants, nuts, seeds, avocados, etc. So what do we eat? We eat fruits, we eat vegetables, we eat whole grains, we eat pulses, and we eat nuts and seeds. From plants, we get all the micronutrients. We get vitamins and minerals, phytonutrients, antioxidants, fiber, and plant-based diets are low in saturated fat and cholesterol. So now we look at the China study. T. Colin Campbell, the author of the China study, what does he have to tell us about plant foods? He says, whole plant-based foods prevent diseases across the board. What is good for your heart is also good for your brain, your liver, kidneys, and the nervous system. Nutrients from animal products promote cancer growth, whereas nutrients from plant foods decrease cancer growth. So what are the other lessons that we learn from the blue zones? The first lesson we learn is stop eating when you are 80% full. Okinawans practice Hara Hachibu, a Confucian mantra that loosely translates belly 80% full. The healthiest people in the world don't eat until they are uncomfortably full. Rather, they stop eating when they are about 80% full. It sounds simple, but it can take some practice to stop eating at the point of satisfaction when you are used to eating until you are stuffed. The best way to do this is to adopt mindful practices. Eat meals at a table with all the devices turned off. Take your time at meals and chew your food thoroughly. There is a saying that your stomach does not have any teeth. Above all, stay patient. With time, it's possible to train your body to stop eating when you are 80% full. The other lesson that we learn is eat your smallest meal later in the day. Have you heard the saying, eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper? But I don't quite agree with this because as per Ayurveda, when we wake up in the morning, the digestive juices haven't actually started working. So I would probably rephrase this like, eat your breakfast like a prince, lunch like a king, and dinner like a pauper. People in blue zones tend to follow this dining pattern and may be healthier for it. Indeed, large observational studies have linked large evening meals and nighttime snacking with increased risk for obesity, metabolic syndrome, and other related health conditions. Ready to give it a try? Start by avoiding snacks after dinner. Once your appetite adjusts, you can work towards eating larger meals during the day and smaller ones at night. In the first session, we talked about genetic and epigenetic changes. We said 20% is genetic and 80% is epigenetic. We talked about sirtuins. They seem to protect the body against diseases of aging. The idea is, as we get older, genes are switched on and off in the wrong way. The problem during aging is that chemicals come in and stick to the histones, the DNA, the DNA where DNA is packaged in, and turn genes on. It is this what we call epigenetic change, and that is reversible. These sirtuins actually make proteins. What the sirtuin proteins do in our body is that they clip off the chemical groups. And now the gene that was turned on in the old person goes off again. And that's what the sirtuins are doing in our bodies right now. So we saw in the last series that they are stimulated when we don't eat and when we exercise. However, they turn off when we have a large pizza. However, there are certain natural plant compounds which may be able to increase the level of these proteins in our body. And foods containing sirtuins have been dubbed as sirt foods. And some of these foods are green tea, dark chocolate, apples, citrus fruits, parsley, turmeric, kale, and blueberries. So by eating a plant-based diet, we are also adding longevity to our diet. In the first session, we also talked about telomeres, that we may have more control over our aging than we think. The telomeres are structures at the tip of chromosomes that play a key role in cellular aging. They sit at the end of strands of DNA like the protective caps on shoelaces. Stress from a rough lifestyle will shorten those caps, making it more likely that cells will stop dividing and essentially die. These telomeres shorten each time a cell divides. Elizabeth Blackburn tells us lengthening telomeres with medication could be dangerous. Lifestyle changes are far safer than a pill. So what will help us keep our telomeres long? Diet. Consumption of certain foods will actually help with the length of telomeres. So it has been shown that berries, mushrooms, oats, flaxseed actually help with the length of telomeres. So let's pause for a second and look at food for thought. What we've covered today is once you start eating plant-based foods, you make yourself heart attack proof. The longest lived people eat a plant-based diet. Nothing they eat has a wrapper. Are we feeding health or are we fueling disease? If it is from a plant, eat it. If it is made in a plant, skip it. And the final one is food turns genes on and off. So what are we going to cover next? First of all, we have done the first pillar, which is M for mouth. We've looked at fasting and feasting. By fasting and feasting, meaning eating the right foods, we can beat disease, we can increase our health span and longevity. Next week, we start with the second pillar, which is M for mind. And within mind, we are going to look at meditation. We are going to look at blue zones and stress reduction techniques. We are going to look at meditation and longevity. We are going to look at meditation and stress reduction. And we are going to look at meditation and mental illness. And finally, meditation and spirituality. So